All your power.
Very official Robert's rules right there.
Very official.
Do we start with the land acknowledgement or do we start with the? Let's do that. Let's do a land acknowledgement. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. This land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene was built within the traditional homelands known as Kalapuya Iligi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. They did it. Now we can do the agenda and materials review. Are there any adjustments to the agenda that we need to be making? I will say that I have to leave at 7:28. So if we're not done by then, I'll be stepping out a little early. Minutes approval. Are there any adjustments to the minutes that we need to
I
make?
do have an adjustment. The first paragraph that says my name, at the last sentence, it says there needs to be a change. Perhaps that sentence is incomplete and we could add a change in practice or policy, whichever one sounds best. And that's the only change I have.
Any other changes? All right. So
I'll
then,
move to approve the minutes that with the amendment.
thank you.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Okay, that is approved and we can move on. Comments from board members and commission liaisons. If I am correct, you are still police commission and you are human rights commission. You are those things.
Good.
So you can give any kind of comment and touch on those meetings if you have anything from them. Would you like to start?
Sure. I've not attended a meeting in person, with the Human Rights Commission yet, but I know that they're talking generally and broadly about the case that we reviewed last week. And they're talking about a few other cases that where there might be a bias component, if I can say that. I watched the last two police commission meetings. They also were discussing in bigger terms the case that we discussed last month. In terms of how to move forward. Interesting discussions. They're actually talking about a cultural audit. I won't try to step over Alan, but they're talking about a cultural audit. That's not something that we talked about, but that's an interesting way to move forward and figure out how to get things how to make things better for officers, particularly female officers in the department. I also attended a tour of the Eugene Police Department with my class. It was Sergeant
Good.
Brian Malone. And I thought he did a really good job. He was super kind. He answered all of our questions and they were about the department, but also about his pathway to being a police officer and getting into leadership. So that was interesting. I also had a presentation in class by an officer who I'm not remembering his last name. His first name is Dave, and he covers Highway 99. There's a homeless issue. Okay, yeah, I think it's Officer Clark, Sergeant Clark, Officer Clark. He also was really cool, and he has a diverse background. I think more officers like that should be recruited, and officers with that kind of, I think, not just background, but how that background informed him. Not everyone perhaps is so empathetic. So I think that was really insightful. He also answered questions about the department and his career path. So that was cool. I'm excited about our training topic tonight. I think that it's very relevant. Yeah.
Thank you. I only commented on your visiting the police station, not to single you out, but in our last meeting, if I recall correctly, you expressed some hesitancy in that. I took that to heart, and in fact, I talked to the interim chair of the police commission about why we hold the police commission meetings at the police shop. And her response was that if she continues in that role, that she's exploring the option of bringing it off campus. It's helpful, it's useful for staff, but it also, and it's nice, I mean, it's nice to make it easy for the chief with the demands and DC Adams and others, but it's also nice to have it be a welcoming meeting and not have people deterred. And so, but I'm glad that you took that step and went, and I'm happy for that. 2 police commission meetings, I think, and yes, we did discuss the issue of the case that we discussed at this table last month, and just the general issue of there was a study done, PERF, I believe is the name of the organization, from 2017, really on the same issues that were kind of coming to the forefront again, and it's hiring, retention, promotion, special units, women and underrepresented communities, and just, you know, we had this case that we dealt with last month. The police commission had a couple of people, a letter from a former officer, and there's been some media, so we went from kind of anecdotal to wanting the police commission overall having a feeling of wanting to express to the powers that be that this needs to be addressed. It seemed like the chief was on it from the get-go, wasn't hiding from the controversy or the discussion, had started already engaged conversations with an outside consulting firm to conduct some form of what's being referred to as a cultural audit, but a follow-up to the 2017 examination of the same issues. And, you know, to some degree, they're perennial issues, you know, and to some degree that, you know, there might be something going on. And yes, the process of the police commission, you know, whoever, Michael was my predecessor liaison, and he used to express the rigidity of that group and its agenda and its work plan, and it's all important, but there are these things that come up like this issue or students on campus, or they're just things that happen. And so I think the police commission is trying to find a way to be reactive and stick to its work plan and kind of learn its role. There's going to be a massive turnover on the police commission. Starting in July, I think it'll be, you know, there's quite a few departures, so it will be interesting as that body finds its way, but that was the main, we also discussed at police commission, we did a 90-day retention, recommended a retention policy on the cameras of 90 days. One major development was the chief of police had no hesitation to say, I don't use facial recognition and I don't mind the policy of the EPD, you know, our policies reflecting that we don't use it. And if there comes a time when paraphrasing the chief, if there comes a time when he thinks that we need it in this community, that he'll come and ask for it. But so there was some policy discussion around the cameras that have been ongoing, and some other things, but that's the liaison report, so thank you. Mr. Chair, welcome.
Thank you. Excuse me for arriving late today. Where
2 liaisons have
Okay.
reported, if that's the plural of liaisons.
We started with Monique.
Okay.
Yes, so
in play.
opening
All right.
around here.
And Rick.
General comments, is that what we are?
Mhm.
Okay. I apologize for missing last meeting, but I didn't notice anything particular about this issue in the minutes. And I kind of looked for it, was whether or not there was a concern at the time of the meeting where this issue of cultural competency or whatever we were talking about, cultural relations, is an appropriate subject for the Board of Civilian Review Board as opposed to the HR people at the city. Was that discussed?
I can speak to that. It was rarely discussed. I know Lee can speak to it more. I think that it was said that that's more of the police commission's role. But I think in previous meetings, what Leah has said is that the line between what's HR and what the auditor investigates is misconduct. So HR issues might be, someone's eating my food out of the fridge, the work fridge, but this is misconduct and a violation of policy. And I'd like Leah to clarify.
Yeah, sorry. I can, and I apologize that I can't be there in person tonight, guys. I hope I'm not like horribly loud. I'm watching your faces. Anyway, hi. This is very distracting. Okay. So Rick, thank you for bringing that up. We are responsive to specific complaints, as you know, and so the case last month was related to specific complaints. As far as any kind of audit of the culture of the department, that's definitely, I see that as outside of our purview. I've offered, also, I think our participation in that, or our name frankly attached to that, could have a chilling effect on people wanting to participate in it. So I was asked at Police Commission if we would be willing to participate in it, and I brought that up there. We have certain funds that are reserved for external investigations that we may partner with the city to commit to that study, but I offered that and it has not been followed up on. So I think you're right. The overall like culture of the department I see as it's related to what we do, but it's definitely not something that we can jump in on. So I hope that makes sense, and I apologize for any strange harmonica background noises that you may or may not hear, because I hear them.
The cultural audit, but can you speak to why you investigate these cases and it's not an HR issue?
Oh, sure. Because yeah, thank you. Pretty much what you said. That basically, we partner with HR, and we partnered with HR on that complaint because there were HR aspects to it. And we kind of do that on a case-by-case basis. If we look at a complaint and we think that there are specific instances of misconduct that specifically violate EPD policy as opposed to city policy, then we will take those on and partner with HR for those investigations. For things that are specific to just city policies or just to HR policies, we tend to back off and let them take the lead. And then it's sort of similar to how we would handle a criminal complaint, where we let somebody else take care of it. And then at the end, we check in and make sure there's nothing that we need to tie up. Does that make sense?
It does. My only concern is that what the input from each, the HR and from CRB, it's going to have an effect on what the chief does, because it's obviously something that's going to happen, end up in his desk sometime or another. I'm wondering what role we have in that, if it's an HR issue. When you say partner, I'm a little confused about that.
Well, so basically when we partner with HR on a case, that means that in it, so the IA investigator is the lead investigator, and then we have an HR person in the room asking questions, and then we are also in the room. We submit our questions to IA, so we are asking our questions through them as we typically would. And then the city has basically 2 investigators in the room, which would be IA and HR. So they participate in that investigation with us. And then when that investigation is done, we make our adjudication recommendation, and then our part is finished. HR does then make disciplinary record, or they sort of issue a range of disciplines available to EPD, and that's sort of where there's any civilian input into discipline. The disciplinary process is through HR.
I guess my question really is more, what does the union have to say about the role of both involved in whether or not the officer is disciplined?
They know that we're not taking part in that discipline, and they have not specifically objected to the number of investigators in those cases where we partner with HR.
Thank you.
Have they, Lindsay?
No. No.
Okay. Rob, sorry, people who I can't see.
Want Clay to go next?
Yeah, ready, Clay?
Yeah,
Clay?
hello, that's all my comments.
Yeah.
No comments? Nobody said, sorry, I was distracted. Hello. I was distracted by the owl. My turn.
Yeah,
The only thing I have is that, I attended a work session with the city council with, Jose and these fine auditor's office folks. They gave a great annual report from the auditor's office, and then we gave a quick presentation on the CRB and what we've done. And I did promise that I would pass on many, many thanks from the council members for the work that everybody in this room does. And they understand that it is a big ask for volunteers to take the time every month to read the cases and think about them thoughtfully, and they appreciate that. Is that? Yes, yeah, that's what they said.
There was
And-
a special shout out to Alan. Do you remember that part?
Oh, yeah, there's a
Yeah.
special shout out to Alan, because you are stepping down from our board.
Oh,
I think it was Councilor Link.
It was.
Yeah.
I didn't bring shame upon us, so.
Not yet.
Wow.
yeah, now,
You have some
you're
time.
still here.
Sounds like you're coming back next time too. I think that's all my comment, so I appreciate the opportunity that I was able to do that and give the report. Because I agree, this is important work and we do a really good job. We do,
Yeah,
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to apologize for arriving late today. As you can imagine, we're dealing with new things every day on campus right now. And I wanted to say thank you to Rob and Lindsay for preparing an excellent report. That's all I have. Thank you all. These are fun documents to prepare, so thank you for doing that.
Can I just follow up to one of Rick's comments, just real briefly? Thank you. So I think the discussion also morphed into so we do discuss policies, practices and things, that we take away from. And in this case, it was a serial harassment type behavior over, a number of employees. And so I think the discussion morphed into a reflection, and I don't think it's inappropriate that just as a group, we express concern that there seems to be this kind of issue surfacing and it's coming from a bunch of different directions, and wouldn't it be nice if it got taken care of? So I don't disagree with what you said about the propriety of what we do, sticking to the discipline and the evaluation of that. And the auditor, I agree, there was a budget discussion, just because there's there is a tight budget cycle that we're in, and the police commission and this board both, I think, were expressing that we don't want it to sit, we'd like it to get addressed.
Thank
So, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're gonna switch into a training topic now on crowd management and public demonstrations. The floor is yours. Thank you.
And get close to the owl.
Good to see everybody again. Hope you don't mind, but I did prepare an outline for today, so I can try to stay on 20 minutes, because we are talking about a topic today when we're thinking about training that, I mean, we really literally could be here for hours and then out on the grounds and trying to actually figure out and live the life of a crowd control officer. But before I get into that, if I might just take a minute, step back. I missed last meeting when we did the review and things, and it's not lost on me that, I don't know, what, a year and a half, 2 years ago, we had a similar case, and I sat here and said, hey, isolated incident. I wrote that check and it bounced.
Mhm.
Not lost on me. I'm aware of that.
It did come up.
Yeah, and quite frankly, candidly, I personally thought we were further along in our journey than we are, and we're not. And sometimes you get these these reminders. So I just wanted you all to know that it's not lost to me that that check bounced and I got it.
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself real quick?
Yep,
for the-
Sure, you bet.
Thank
For those
you.
that are out in listening in, I'm Sean Adams. I'm the Deputy Chief of Police. And we're gonna talk today about crowd control tactics and our use of what's known as the mobile response team for the Eugene Police Department. So if you bear with me for a little bit, let me just start with a little bit of a history lesson on how we got to be where we're at today. Historically, the Eugene Police Department, up until about 10, 12 years ago, did run a crowd control team. And at that time, it was decided that the department did not want to no longer wanted to continue with a crowd control team. And so every officer in the agency was trained in crowd control tactics and provided a helmet, a visor, and a gas mask. And that's kind of the agency philosophy or approach to how we're going to deal with crowd control events. So you can probably see the problems with that is we have officers that have no specialized training in crowd control incidents. Maybe once a year they would get some training, and we're going to put them out into crowd control environments with a gas mask and a helmet on and say, go deal with this. And what happened, lo and behold, in early 2020, we realized how bad a mistake that was. And really, as an organization, our response was we got overwhelmed with the riots that occurred here within the city. And we sent our SWAT team in to deal with that. That's a good tool, but that's not the application for that tool. So stepping back from that, and this is part and parcel to some of my background coming in from Salem, where I spent 19 years in emergency operations. In the last 11 years in Salem, I was emergency operations group commander. And in part of my duties were the crowd control team that existed within Salem. So the model that we had created in Salem was something that we're working on and creating here in Eugene. And that is a model of mobile response team, a specialized crowd control team that we can deploy to deal with crowd events. So that kind of is a little bit of a brief history of how we got to be where we're at today and where we're going. How do we view crowd control events or gatherings? And this is a key component. So one of the things about any crowd control event is we have to channel community expectations through the chief of police downward to the teams as to what does the community expect for our police department in responding to crowd control events. And each community is different. And here in Eugene, we have a long-standing history of protest. And, you know, we can't just sweep that aside. That's part and parcel of this community. And so we take that into account in how we approach each and every operation. Most of the time we get some indicators that there's going to be some type of event. And we normally would think of, oh, there's a protest going on here, or what's happening at the University of Oregon right now. But our crowd control team is used anytime we have a large number of people in a specific area. For example, Lane County Fair is coming up into the summer here. Our mobile response team officers will be part and parcel of that event for securing it. And does that mean that our officers are going to be standing out there in riot gear with shields and helmets? No, I mean, we're out there in uniform. But if something would happen, these are the officers that have been specially trained in how to deal with large crowd events, up to and including an active shooter within the fair, which, by the way, 2 of the last 3 years we've had, and some other things that occurred. So we don't necessarily think of something as a protest that would spin up our mobile response team or a crowd control team. But anytime there would be a large scale event with a lot of people present. And that's kind of the agency philosophy, is how do we get to where we're going to be? There's a philosophy or a new phrase that's been introduced into the organization, and that is crowd control and crowd protection, because they're two different things. Now, Oregon revised statutes will tell you, and I have these statutes somewhere, it's 180 something, or other 180A 708, would tell you that crowd control means exactly what it sounds like. You're controlling a crowd, controlling the actions of the crowd. But by and large, when we respond or we deploy our mobile response team, it's crowd protection. So we have a protest that starts and we're going to march on the streets. We're going to give up the streets. We give up the streets. What do? We block traffic in front. We block traffic behind. We will mirror the march on bicycles to try to keep those that are marching protected. We have an actual philosophy of crowd protection. And that can also occur when you have counter protest groups that would come in. So you have one group that will start with a protest and there comes a counter protest. Equal opportunities for free speech, crowd protection. Where it becomes crowd control is when it turns riotous or something happens and we have to disperse a crowd or we have to protect some type of a hard fixed subject or object or area, such as the Ferry Street Bridge, which is a major ingress and egress for emergency equipment over the river. That's a hard no for us. You can't have that bridge, and that's the reason why. So that's kind of some of the things. One of the we talk about building a mission statement and a operational plan. There's 3 overarching objectives for us every time we deploy our crowd control team, and they're done in a specific order. Protect and safeguard lives, protect individual rights, and then protect property in that order. So I think we would all expect that if there's some sort of violence occurring, that we as police officers are going to safeguard lives. Aside from that, we talk about protecting individual rights. That's the right for each of us within this country to be exercising our free speech, regardless however we feel about it, up to and including even hate speech. But that's a free speech and it's a right, and we have to protect it. And sometimes, and I see you looking at me kind of funny, Monique, when I say hate speech, I'm not talking about something that's directed at somebody with some type of threat of violence. I'm talking about some of the vulgar things that we see or hear, which I think by and large, we would all disagree with, but however, are constitutionally guaranteed. And that's a tough place for police officers to be when you're standing on the line, when you vehemently object to what is being said. But you have to hold your ground and you have to hold your position and you have to do what's right by your oath and by your expectations. So how do we make up our team, and what does our team look like? We have an MRT commander that's at the lieutenant level. We have 2 sergeants assigned. And we have a minimum of 20 officers specially trained in crowd control tactics. What's the selection process for a crowd control officer? It's a comprehensive interview followed by a comprehensive physical evaluation to be considered for the team. Then comes what's known as a performance evaluation or performance review. At that time, as part and parcel of the performance review, a assigned investigator will go and we'll look at personnel files, we'll look at IA files, we'll look at any type of anything that would indicate that that individual that's going to be on this team does not have either 1, the right heart, or 2, the right temperament for this work. As you can imagine, if you're a hothead or otherwise, and you don't have the right temperament for the work, and you're standing on a line, and somebody's 2 inches from you yelling in your face, and you have to maintain decorum, that's not the time that you can break. You can't have that. That should not exist in our police organization to begin with, but we're scrutinizing that. Once team members are selected, they go to a 40-hour basic Oregon course where they're taught basic crowd control tactics, and we train 66 hours a year. And that's just your basic training. On top of that, there'll be additional training. So before I continue moving on, because I'm moving at breakneck pace, questions thus far? I'm trying to build in some time at the end because I know you will have questions and things I'm going to miss. So I'm trying to get some high level stuff in and provide some opportunities for some questions. So equipment is really interesting right now. So let me again take you back in a historical journey. We think of and we've seen historically crowd control teams, riot helmet, balaclavas, face covered, shields, holding a shield, big stick, marching down, bonging on it. That's going out the door. That is no longer the way we approach these. So our approach now is a standard police uniform, a utility uniform. It's a little bit more utilitarian than what I'm wearing right now. And what we've done is anything that would have been external historically, like your arm protectors, your shin protectors, your full body protectors, are now going underneath the uniform. We've bought special equipment that will absorb impact that you wear underneath your uniform, and it's not visible to anybody. So our officers will go out and they will all, for all intents and purposes, appear as though they are in just a regular police uniform, with the exception of a specialized helmet. And so we are now equipping our officers with helmets that very much look like bike helmets. They're ballistic helmets, but they're designed because this is also your hearing and communication set. So the helmets have built-in earmuffs that go over your ears, so that in an environment where you're in loud noise, loud crowd noise, You can still hear your radio and you can still hear commands as to what's expected. And the ballistic helmet with the visor that will come down will protect you from throwing projectiles. I will tell you, in 2020, we did have softball-sized rocks thrown at our police officers, littered the street. And so we're not immune from violence against police officers in protest type events here, so. Bicycles. Almost all our work now is being done on bicycles. This is a great evolution in how we're doing business. Bicycles humanize you, and they humanize you to the crowd, first of all. Secondly, they increase communication. So when you're on a bicycle and you're riding beside a protest or near a protest, the bicycle can facilitate communication. You can get close to people, you can hear them, you can listen to them, you can talk with them, you can communicate. All the while, you can utilize your bicycle as a barrier between you and whoever you're talking to safeguard yourself, so that you don't have an escalation of violence. And so that's part and parcel of how we're trying to utilize some de-escalation skills in advance by putting our officers on bicycles. One of the other things we found is if you go and you stand on a line with shields and helmets and batons, that is an attractor for any crowd. What do they want to do? They want to push right up to the line and you create a flashpoint with whoever you're dealing with. Don't do it. We try not to stand on the line unless we have to deny an area to somebody. That's not something we want to do. So let's talk force options, because I know that'll be a big thing that we'll want to hear about. Each of our members of our mobile response team will carry a 36-inch wooden baton. It's a wooden stick. It's not a axe handle. It's a 1-inch wooden stick. Aside from that, we also carry pepper ball launchers. And I think you guys had the opportunity to see or experience the pepper ball launchers. And we also carry 40mm launchers. And I think you've also had the opportunity to see those as well. Nothing different than what we're carrying patrol-wise or otherwise. How we use those tools may be a little bit differently. So pepper ball can be used in what would be known as a direct action. In other words, I could directly shoot a pepper ball at an individual to gain compliance or facilitate arrest. Generally, with pepper balls in a crowd control environment, we will shoot it at the ground of protesters that are getting either too close to us as we're making an arrest, or we want them to create some space. Almost all the time when we're doing that, those pepper balls are inert. In other words, there's no OC powder in them. They're talcum powder. But they get the effect that we want to have when the protesters see it. I don't want to have that occur. 40mm foam tip baton rounds are specifically excluded from use in crowd control environments. That is written into the Oregon revised statutes. We cannot use them for crowd control. We carry them in order to facilitate arrest or protect officers. Those are the only two manners in which the 40mm is used in crowd control environments. We saw in 2020 with some of the experiences that occurred in Portland, where it appeared there was some indiscriminate 40mm firing into crowds. And obviously, if you get hit in the head with one of those, that's deadly force. And so we're very cautious and very careful and very deliberate about how we use those tools so that we're staying consistent with our Oregon revised statutes. Our officers will carry large Mark 90 pepper spray canisters. Yep, they look like a small fire extinguisher and they shoot like it. And they're used in the same manner as which they would be on patrol. That's either to facilitate an arrest or to safeguard officers. And last but not least, yes, we use OC canisters. They're hand delivered. We do not launch any gas into crowds. Everything we use is delivered by hand, rolled out at the feet of individuals. We do not use any sound diversionary devices in crowd control. We do not use any CS gas, which is tear gas. We do not use any aerial dispersal tools. The only thing we're carrying is hand-delivered canisters of OC. And have you guys had any training with what oleoresin capsicum pepper spray? So if you haven't, I'll just, as a refresher, OC oleoresin capsicum is a organic material. It's derived from the seeds, stems, and placenta from the habanero pepper. It's ground up into a fine powder. And in the case of your canisters, it's put inside with a deflagrating agent, which causes it to launch out. So if, most of the time we are throwing, cold gas, in other words, if you touched or grabbed it or otherwise, you're not gonna get burned if it hits your foot. We do have some hot gas canisters, but very careful about how we deploy those, just based on the crowd and our actions, so. I'm still rolling, so any questions? Okay.
I'm waiting.
Okay. Let's talk use of force. Body worn cameras are required and they're on all the time when we're in a crowd control environment. So, that's a little bit different than our proposed SWAT policy, which would be, you know, you'd have the opportunity to, turn off your camera at periods of time where there was nothing happening. In a crowd control environment, something's happening all the time. And so body worn cameras required to be running all the time. The problem is we have limitations on battery life, and so we could get in potential where we have elongated events where we're gonna lose some of that footage. Our entire philosophy on crowd control or crowd protection is based entirely around voluntary compliance. How do you get voluntary compliance in a crowd control environment? First up front, if you can interact with the group, you want to interact with them ahead of time. Hey, I see you have an event coming up. Do you want to partner with us? Do you want to engage with us? Do you want to share information with us? Most of the time, these groups do not, but we try. And then if we can get dialogue at the time of, do we have some leaders or somebody we can talk to direct face to face? What are your expectations? Can we support those? How do we find a compromise? How do we find the common ground where who's ever protesting can carry on with their events while we're maintaining public peace? And so that's what everything's based around, announcements. So we will, before we do anything, we'll make announcements to the crowd. And I will tell you, when we make announcements to the crowd, we use what's known as an LRAD, long range acoustic device. If you know anything about LRAD, they have they have a function. I have a little name for it. It's called the brain melter. It doesn't really melt any brains, but the LRAD has the ability to send out a loud screeching noise. And that's a dispersal tool. LRAD was designed to put on ships to repel pirates. So you can imagine you can send out this acoustic sound. It's annoying. So we are forbidden. You cannot use that function of the LRAD system for crowd control. That is written into Oregon revised statutes. Where we use LRAD is to make announcements to the crowd. Hey, you're doing this. We need you to stop. This is now a riot. We need you to stop. Your exit is this way. We are going to deploy chemical capacitants or irritants. And you need to move. This is your safe egress out of this location. And so we are using PA to make announcements to the crowd. One of the other things we're trying to work on right now is also an electronic board. So that as we're making the same notifications to our crowd, we can have an EMD electronic board in the background that is flashing the same type of message and warning, so that if you can't, for whatever reason, hear the LRAD, you can see it, or if for some reason you're hearing impaired, you can also see it. And so we're working on that right now. It's a little complicated because I guess you can imagine in a crowd control environment, if you throw an EMD out there, it becomes a target for every rock projectile and everything. So how do you fortify that and still deliver? So that's some of the things we're working on.
Drones.
Hmm.
Displayed in the sky.
Yeah, you know, that would be cool. So what are we currently doing? I think I talked about it right now. We deploy the team on bicycles. We avoid static lines. We try as much as possible where and when we can to communicate with whatever group to try to get voluntary compliance before we do anything. We are transitioning, as I said, away from hard gear into that softer appearance. The gear is known as Zion gear. I think we have a good portion of it now for our officers to be wearing underneath their uniforms. And then the last thing that we're developing right now is something that's gained some notoriety nationwide. And we're developing a dialogue team. And so when I say a dialogue team, these are specially trained officers that their only function in a protest event is to create dialogue. So they'll go forward, they'll talk to the crowds, try to gain voluntary compliance. Portland's used this with some pretty good success. Seattle has as well. And we sent a sergeant to Columbus, Ohio to get some information. So this is something that we're working on right now, and hopefully we'll get that up off the ground. So I've got in here just a few points. Any questions thus far? Anything I ripped through?
Do you always make a verbal warning before you deploy any of the like pepper spray gases, anything like that?
Yes, so let me qualify that as I see it. If we're facilitating an arrest and the crowd interferes with that, we've probably already made an announcement, but there's a chance that we could be making or taking somebody in an arrest, and we may deploy pepper spray either through the canister or otherwise. Prior to actually deploying a canister of gas, we have made a series of announcements multiple times. We have provided the avenue which you leave so that you can avoid the gas. And that is all done before we would, and that's required by law now.
Okay.
So House Bill 2829, 2928, one of those is what was created in 2021 that did some revisions to our Oregon revised statutes. It was followed up by House Bill 4131 that had some additional changes there, and now it's codified, I think, 807A, 708, somewhere in there is the Oregon revised statutes for our requirements that we need to do before we do any of these things. Concerns and considerations. So here's the big one, and this is what we see. Our protests start out peaceful, well-intended. There's generally, they don't start out as some kind of violent, tumultuous event. And then we have individuals get into the crowd and they're the violent ones, and they hide in the anonymity of the crowd to conduct criminal action. This is super difficult for police to deal with. You can imagine several hundred people and maybe 5 people in the middle of it throwing the Molotov cocktails. That's a real life example, but pretty extreme. And so that's a consideration. How do you deal with that? And a good portion of the time, we just have to stand there or sit there and take it, because the greater good, and that would be the deploying of the gas into the crowd to disperse maybe a few individuals, may or may not be there. The change in that is when that becomes life-threatening or it's safeguarding anybody in any way, then that changes the game for us. And then we're really, quite frankly, mandated to take some action to safeguard people. What we'll try to do then is we'll try to target the individuals in the crowds that we have identified. We know who they are, we watch them, and we'll try to go in and selectively arrest them. But again, you can imagine if you move into a crowd to arrest one individual and the crowd turns on you, it's very difficult. So we have to be very measured in how we're going to approach that. And a good portion of the time, we're going to walk away from it to some degree. Counter protesters. I mean, we're coming into the election cycle. We're going to see protests and counter protests is coming. By and large, we will try to get in between the groups and create safe distances so that, you know, each group can exercise their rights without commingling. The only problem with that is when you have sizable groups on either side, we just simply do not have the manpower to be able to separate the groups. And in that case, it's one of two things will happen. Either groups will police themselves and they'll get along, or they're going to go violent. And if it goes violent, it's a riot, and then that changes the dynamics. So, and then our restrictions on tactics. And when I say this, by no means do I think that any of the legislation that came out after everything that occurred in 2020 are bad. In fact, the Sheriff's Association, the Chiefs Association supported almost all of them. But there are some restrictions in here that make it very difficult for us to do our jobs at times. And so we have to be cognizant that, I mean, I ripped off 2 House bills and an ORS to you guys. There's just a myriad of rules that we really have to know inside and out. And I think we do, but we're constantly evaluating, are we good? Are we good? Are we good? And so, you know, it's all going to ebb and flow. Some changes will come about, and I think some changes will go back a little bit the other way again, maybe. But I want to make sure that I think our changes are good. I think some of the things that we saw that occurred in Portland necessitated some changes, and we're paying attention, and, you know, we're doing what we need to do with that. So I don't know how long it took, but it sure felt like longer than 20 minutes, but I am more than happy to answer your questions.
So I have some like questions, comments, maybe some commendations, but it's good to hear that like the department is trying, like the soft gear, for example, like that's a small move that can make a big difference. And it makes people feel like it's a less
Yeah.
scary or an antagonistic environment. I also think the idea of crowd protection is really important. It's meaningful to hear a department talk about that. Because oftentimes, well, let's just skip what happens. The other thing that I think is important is that the department rides along with those protesters on the street. I've seen it happen. It's really, I think that's meaningful. It's powerful. I think definitely for those that are protesting. I know that Beatrice and I, when we staffed the Pride event, the special response team was there, protection. I thought that was helpful, and there were counter protesters, but I never saw them. They were managed by the police department. And so I think that those things can be good. Or they are good. Yeah, so you mentioned that you are working on a dialogue team.
Mhm.
In the second response to the protests in New York, I saw like officer or like people in NYPD coats that said NYPD legal on the back. So I'm curious if you ever have like any legal observers present or stuff like that.
So for us, we will bring the city attorney into our command post. If it's a big enough event, we'll have the city attorney there to advise us. But we do not have anybody on the ground, per se, giving up-to-date legal advice. We do encounter quite a bit of, oh gosh, I can't remember the organization, but
Civil Liberties Defense.
yeah, that's them. They wear yellow coats and they will show up, and we know who they are, and they'll have dialogue with us, and we'll pay attention to what they say. And they're really there as a police watchdog to make sure that we're doing things the right way and we're not having any violations. So ideally, this dialogue team, when we get it off the ground, the officers will still have to be wearing the helmets, unfortunately, but want them in a polo shirt, just casual looking clothes, concealed handgun, dialogue team all over. And the idea would be to humanize that individual as much as we can, and to the point with the soft, to create, not to create the barrier, because I look at and I see somebody holding a shield, but to create something where I can go, okay, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Okay, well, let's talk about it. So I think there's a lot, particularly in this community, with what we see, with what we refer to as protests, which, almost always are peaceful. I think it's really, really, really valuable for us in this community. We're excited about this. So, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, Lisa.
Thanks. Thank you, Deputy Chief Adams. The timeliness, I mean, we're kind of complacent and you're talking about the election, but I was in New York 2 weeks ago, like what's happening on campuses is not to be ignored. It is atrocious what happened to the library at Portland State. I really hope that doesn't happen here at the police commission. Chief Skinner did express his desire that he's publicly told the University of Oregon that he doesn't want to come in there with batons, whacking, that's not the interest. And I just hope that that we're really poised to let the First Amendment thrive, but protect the property. And once it's, that vandalism takes hold. So I just hope that that you're working with the university and that's on the forefront and ready to act, and hopefully we don't end up in that kind of mess. And I appreciate your report, and it's very timely. And yes, the election's coming, but this is here and now, right now, and hopefully we can stay with a thoughtful response, allowing things to happen and not be celebrated like all these other universities. So
Yeah, if I may, that's the University of Oregon Police Department's responsibility. We have been very clear with them that is not our responsibility. And unless absent life-saving measures where there's something going on there's a significant threat or ongoing violence, we're not going onto campus. And we're certainly not going onto campus to clear peaceful protesters' intents. So there's ongoing negotiation between the University of Oregon's legal counsel and our legal counsel as to what would constitute anything where they would need our assistance. But I can tell you that, and Chief Skinner spoke to it. We have no desire to go on that campus, and take any action. It's not the city of Eugene's. It's not our responsibility.
What are you doing this August and would you like to travel to Chicago for a while?
Is that Democratic or Republican? I can't remember. I'm like, no,
Convention?
yeah, no,
Rehash of the 68.
Yeah.
Convention.
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Well,
It's,
thank you for your talk. I appreciate it.
Can I ask one clarifying question?
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about passive or static resistance and your approach to that?
Sure.
In terms of force or
yeah,
not using force?
I mean, if you're passively resisting, in other words, let's just say you're sitting there, you're refusing to comply. We had this, we see it quite a bit where people really just want to get arrested. They're not going to engage in violence. They just want, as a display of their support, they want to be arrested. When we're dealing with passive or static resistance, our approach will be the same as it is. Well, if somebody's physically fighting, that's a little different, but we'll go out and tell them you're under arrest and will you comply? And most of the time they will comply and handcuff them, and that's it. And it's a very simple process. There's no force used. There's no show of force. Really, it doesn't even though we'll have a major event, there will be some shows of force. It wouldn't even rise to the level of a force encounter for us. So, but that can, amplify to a point of, we do have protester devices. So sleeping dragons, if we're familiar with those, it's a steel sleeve where you can stick your arm in and handcuff to another person. Makes it very difficult for us. And they're they become very elaborate in how they're designed and constructed. We know how to defeat them. It just takes time. And so, there's ways to defeat all this, but it comes back to the same thing in that, voluntary compliance, will you comply? No, or yes. And most of the time, everybody will say yes. If not, then yeah, there may be some pressure point manipulation. There may be some, physical custody arrests. But the use of, let's just say, baton, active countermeasures, pepper spraying a passive resistor, no. But that's actually forbidden by our policy. So, and that's pretty clear. That would be an abuse of force.
So this might be too technical, but when we did a training and the officer showed us how they would try to cuff someone that was passively resisting, like on the ground and their arms under their chest. And he like jammed, and it wasn't really that aggressive, but he like jammed his knee into this area to try to get it open. But if that didn't work, they talked about how they get up the levels. And this wasn't in the context of crowd control. Maybe there's a difference, but he said eventually he could use focus blows. And that seems not appropriate.
Yeah, and so we would avoid that. I mean, focus blows in a crowd control environment. So here's what this would look like. Two big giant MRT members go up to a passively resisting protesters on the ground with their hands underneath them, and then they start delivering focus blows. We're front page on every media outlet. And so that's why I go back to, we talk about the right mindset, the right temperament, the right heart, and then we train and reiterate and we train and reiterate. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to be able to deal with somebody on the ground that's passively resisting, up to and including pressure point manipulation, which is the best way in the world. I mean, if you get up in here behind your ear and give a little pressure, people will want to give you your hands very quickly. So, it's just about being controlled, being methodical in what we're doing. And those are things that we reiterate. I mean, we train like this all the time where we'll bring the poor cadets out and they'll play passive resistors or protesters, and we'll train with them, and and we work on this. But you think about, if you're in an unknown environment, like really even in a protest, anybody could have a weapon, but the likelihood is if you're peacefully protesting and then passively resisting, you're probably not carrying a knife or a gun. You're probably not dangerous to me. Compare and contrast to that to somebody that runs from you in the field, getting up on the ground with a fight on them, their hands are underneath them and they're at their waistband and you don't know what you have. So, in that controlled environment, we would be slow, methodical. That's what we work on, and just work at it piece by piece by piece, and it may also be one of the greatest things that is available to MRT members. It's not necessarily, unless you want to expand your baton, which is hard to do. You can just take that stick and run it up underneath somebody that's on the ground, run it up underneath their armpit, just kind of turn. That arm will come out. It will. it's just a matter of joint manipulation. So there's a lot of different things that we utilize, but that's how we deal with the passive resistor.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Chief, for your presentation. I'd also like to say that, I'm glad that, it seems like, what I hear you saying is that, you see the presentation of riot gear as a show of force.
Mhm.
And thinking about that in the context of de-escalation is something that I really appreciate as a community member. I remember a case maybe a year or two ago, where we had EPD show up to a man's house who was, do you remember this case? Living at home with parents in mental health crisis, and that's where I really learned of show of force as a visual thing, and de-escalation is a kind of visual thing. So I just wanted, yeah, really, really, am thankful for that. And I'm also glad to hear you talk about your response. Things are intense on campus, and
They're intense.
I get it.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we care a lot about students, and I get the sense that you do too.
Yep.
And know that it's difficult to balance civil liberties with safety and property rights. And yeah. Are there other questions or comments? Clay, do you want to have a chance to chime in here? Just making sure.
Oops, sorry. I'm, my first job working with police in Portland was walking along during Occupy protests. So I appreciate the challenge that you all face. I'm really happy to hear, similar to what Jose mentioned, that you're considering this idea of visual presence as something that can antagonize people and how to get around that. So I think that was what I witnessed as the primary challenge, that, protesters don't often see what the police are actually doing sometimes, which is actually protecting the protest. Not sometimes it's not an antagonistic force in that realm, but the physical manifestation of police uniforms and what they mean to a community can just automatically make it a charged environment. So I appreciate that you all are considering that. That's my primary response. Just thanks for the information.
Deputy Chief, thank you.
If
Really
I,
appreciate.
if
Yeah,
I,
no, go ahead.
just one point.
Yeah.
Before I sound like I'm a liar, we're still transitioning completely into the Zion gear. So if we ended up going out like tonight, we may still show up in some fashion of riot gear, because I'm not exactly sure where we are in the transition. What I do know is we have requisitioned the Zion gear, and all our team members will be outfitted in it to soften our appearance.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your presence here. Thank you. Yeah. We're going to break for, let's do 5 minutes. And then we'll return. Wait, play.
Place here.
Who's here? All right. On the case review? All right, excuse me. Please take this away.
Are you good with that, Leah? Can you see when I change pages? Good, good, good. Sometimes the Zoom and the owl are on the same side and sometimes they're opposed.
I can see it. It's not in like slideshow mode, but I can see them, so I'm good.
Yeah.
You're
I'm
fine.
a techie, but sometimes the owl and Zoom don't like each other, but I think this is a win right here that you can just see them.
I think it's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So our case review is an allegation of a deficient vehicle pursuit. So on July 23rd, 2023, Officer A observed a Toyota Camry at the exit of a convenience store in Eugene, Oregon. Officer A recognized the driver, suspect of the Camry. And Officer A knew the suspect had outstanding criminal warrants and a known history of eluding law enforcement. Officer A activated his Eugene Police Department marked patrol vehicles, emergency lights and siren, and initiated a traffic stop of the suspect's vehicle. The suspect ignored Officer A's traffic stop attempt and proceeded out of the convenience store parking lot. Officer A followed the Camry, and the suspect did not yield to his or her traffic stop attempt. Moments later, Officer A slowed his or her vehicle's speed, discontinued use of his or her emergency vehicle lights and siren, and lost sight of the Camry.
Rob, you're doing
Yes,
great. It's not changing slides. It's still on the first one. Just FYI, I can still hear you. It's fine, but just wanted you to.
to the, give me 1 second and try one other thing.
Sorry.
I want it to work.
I mean, I know what happens, so it's okay.
Yeah, my only question is like if for the recording, if someone
Yeah, I was thinking
and I don't know, has hearing impairment and
they'll be in
still-
our minutes.
that's
But
true.
yeah. Oh, there.
That works.
Okay,
I can see this, the summary facts slide now. Sorry.
perfect. So we read that one, so I won't again.
Oh, good. It's even changing.
Look at that. Yeah, so Officer A communicated to the Eugene PD Communications Center and other officers the Camry's description, direction of travel, erratic manner of travel, and that he or she was not in pursuit of the vehicle. Officer A's in-car video footage showed the Camry accelerate away and out of the view of him or her. Moments later, Officer B observed the Camry arrive and stop at a red traffic light. Officer B activated his or her Eugene PD marked patrol vehicle's emergency lights and siren and initiated a traffic stop of the suspect's vehicle. The suspect attempted to retreat and Officer B conducted a forcible stop of the Camry. Officer A arrived on the scene and assisted with the forcible stop. So in his or her IA interview, Officer A stated that the suspect was not an imminent threat to the public and he or she did not engage in a pursuit. In his or her IA interview, Officer B acknowledged that he or she did not know the technicalities of the Eugene PD's pursuit policy. And Officer B stated he or she was concerned with potential crimes by the suspect and stated that he or she believed the suspect was an imminent threat to the public. So then for allegations for Officer A, 814 vehicle pursuits that Officer A initiated and conducted a vehicle pursuit in violation of policy when the risk posed to the public was greater than the need for apprehension.
No, we're not
No.
seeing.
Can you still see it, Leah? All right, so we're at there. I'll tell you what, after they're done, I'll flip it back to the other way, and that way I can
Thank you.
scroll through it. And this is like protesters and counter protesters. I can't wait when it zooms me out. So allegations for Officer B, that Officer B engaged in a vehicle pursuit in violation of policy when the risk posed to the public was greater than the need for apprehension. And then for our adjudication recommendations, so the auditor within policy, for Officer A, chain and chief, all within policy. For Officer B, auditor, sustain, chain and chief are within policy. Then we have our issues for CRB discussion, the complaint intake classification. And was internally generated complaint. And then those summarized, and then we have our normal breakdown for the materials that were provided. So, all right, I'm gonna end this share, so I can flip it over to the other way so the folks in the room can see it. How many slides did we make it our way?
Just a second summary of that. I think for some reason after that, we couldn't see it here.
And you can't see it now, right, Leah?
I now see summary of facts.
Okay. Yeah, I
Oh,
don't know.
no, it's working now for us.
Super.
I
Well
can
done, Rob.
stop any second now before we get credit, so I won't read it again, but I'll just flip through so the folks in the room can take a look at it.
Okay, the weirdest thing is happening though, Leah. Somehow I have control of Robert's slides.
And move it. I set that setting. Well,
Serious?
So
Oh my gosh, I do too.
yeah, so I can move through the presentation.
that was intentional. You guys could see it,
Okay.
but maybe,
Whoa.
Can we go on the table?
Wow.
I would stop pushing buttons now, sorry.
Can I ask a really silly question while this is going on? There was a moment when the suspect vehicle was stopped at a light, and then a police officer turned his or her, their car facing that car so the police officer was against traffic in that moment. Is that officer B who pulled?
Yes.
Yes, correct, B, all right, and A was the one then behind the suspect vehicle facing the correct. Thank you.
all right. If everybody is good.
Great photo,
It's level, mostly.
except on the right side.
All right, we're off the screen share and y'all can take it away.
Thank you, Rob.
I don't know that I deserve a thank you for that one.
It was excellent.
It's the death of me.
We're gonna start out with general comments. And the order will be Monique, Alan, Rick, Clay, Carolyn, Jose. Go ahead, Monique.
This might be relevant for classification and investigation, but I thought it was interesting that we got, or that this case was not just internally generated from anyone, but from a higher level officer. And I think that that's a good thing when we see, perhaps he didn't make any conclusions at the moment, but he had some concerns and he didn't just, accept the superficial opinion of the chain of command. This went through an official investigation. I thought that was a good thing. This might be adjudication, but in the chief's final memo, which he chooses to make for some cases and doesn't for others, and in your memo, in the adjudication memo, you say that I found no bias in the investigation, which I agree. And in the chief's memo, he says something like, I wholeheartedly agree with the chain of command. And so I'm curious if that language is typical, and if that can be expected, if the inverse can be expected, if I could expect you to say there was bias in this investigation, if there was so.
I mean, I don't know that I've ever, sure, if I saw something that wasn't right, yeah, I would call it out, but I don't know that I've ever run across anything that I haven't.
I think I can speak to that a little bit, Monique. So our process has gotten kind of condensed over the years, but we are officially supposed to sign off on whether or not an investigation is biased, in our opinion, whether the investigation shows bias or isn't thorough or more steps need to be taken. I mean, I would say how in practice that works is we collaborate from the beginning. We don't often send things back and say, nope, redo this. But we usually have a little paragraph in there that sort of says, hey, we looked at this. We found it to be thorough and show no bias. So that's part of our sign off on the investigations. Does that help?
Is helpful, thank you. I also thought it was, I'm not sure how many times we've done this, but I thought it was interesting that we are reviewing a case in which both the auditor and the department agreed. But I think that it's so meaningful for us to review a case like that, just in case we don't, the board doesn't agree. Yeah.
So they didn't agree on B. The auditor said sustained B and
Oh, right.
the chain of command disagreed. My general comment just on this issue of chases is like, if you know what the suspect is wanted for, and it isn't like really serious, then there's no point in playing bumper cars on the streets of our city. And, you have to make it, if you know who it is, the fact of being wanted, is just a fact. Like, you saw a wanted person, but you didn't have the chance to affect an arrest, but there'll be another day. But if it's someone that really poses a threat to the community and needs to be caught, or is gonna go out and cause mayhem, then the reasoning applied by the chain of command and its memo and stuff, I totally endorse. We can't let people escape, but if we know what they're wanted for and it's really not that serious, I just can't see the point of having these chases. That's it.
I don't have any general comment.
I agree with what Alan said. I think the risk is greater than the reward in that case. And I think we'll talk more about it, but generally I think I agree with that approach. We really got to evaluate whether someone you're going to pursue and cause mayhem with in a pursuit is worth that pursuit, worth the potential outcomes of it. The other thing I would just respond to that Monique was talking about is I think it was our last case where board members did have some questions about the integrity of some of the line of thinking in the investigation, actually, and sort of assumptions made. And so I think that this is totally an opportunity to call that out if you are uncomfortable with questions that were asked by an investigator or assumptions made by an investigator. And that was really illuminating for me when that was brought up by Carolyn last time. Not to call you out, Carolyn, but I thought it was a good point.
I thought it was too. That's why I made it. I appreciate that we're seeing this case, of course, like we picked it, but in the auditor's report, they did point out the uptick in pursuits in the last year or 2 years. So I think it's interesting and important that we look at some pursuits
Not let
when,
it get away.
yeah, we don't want, I mean, nobody wants it to get away from us.
Full of puns today.
Oh, I didn't even catch that one. Good one, good one, good one. I love it. So yeah, I think that's good. And I'm sure we'll get to it, but like, I think I'll just echo what people are saying, that the pursuit seemed to make the reckless situation, right? Like the person being pursued didn't necessarily act recklessly until Officer B started driving the wrong way on the road. From my vantage point, but we'll get into it.
Thank you, Carolyn. I think one of the things that I would like to revisit in this case was what kind of rubric do officers use to assess risk in this situation in a like really practical way? Alan, you had mentioned that, when we know what someone is wanted for, and then we kind of disengage based upon that kind of practical kind of knowledge. I know that the answer is the totality of circumstances here, but is there a kind of like baseline or a threshold by which we say, okay, pursue or back off? Deputy Chief or
Sure, I can speak to that. I mean, somebody said it just a minute ago, risk created by the pursuit is greater than the need to apprehend. That's the standard
I can offer some narrative on this case. I think I'll wait till after, because I can kind of tell you what the decision thought process was on this. But if you have a known violator, and you know where you can find them later, and you don't have a violent crime, that's a no pursuit. So, you know, if you have a, felony crime, a domestic crime, you believe there's some intoxication, there would be an ongoing, risk created in the community, then there's a pursuit. So unfortunately, you know, I know where you're going. Like,
Yeah.
it would be great if we had some sort of a rubric is a great word.
Yeah, sure.
It's all gonna come back to situational, and what you're seeing and feeling at the time.
Yeah, and this is not a trapdoor question or can we, codify this into words kind of thing? It's it's a really good case selection because it does communicate to the community that there's a subjective amount of that goes into policing. And it's not easy or I don't know, officers are people and making decisions based upon sometimes limited information, and I wanna, bring that in as part of the context that the community hears and sees, so appreciate the opportunity to ask that question.
Thank you.
Please.
So I wanted to thank Clay for mentioning that, the last case is what I had in mind. It could have been in the last case where, the auditor said, the investigation didn't seem to be too unbiased. The language around what was described in the video wasn't that unbiased. And then the chief could have said, I wholeheartedly disagree with the chain of command. That's kind of what I was hinting at. And so I'll just be keeping an eye out moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this round is on complaint intake, classification and monitoring. And Alan,
Yeah, I've waited 3 years to say I don't have anything. Sad as that.
That's a compliment.
Oh, I'm just sitting here
No,
happy.
it's-
Glad to be part of it. I think classification was good. I question the use of the word deficient when we're talking about vehicle pursuit.
And
can you say more about that?
I mean, that's just what I put in the title of the PowerPoint. I could have used improper too. It's
Yeah.
not related to, I mean, I don't think that's written in anything other than the PowerPoints that I give.
Okay.
It's
yeah, all right.
not something related to the case.
Right, you're not, that's fine. That struck me when I saw it.
Deficient, poor, improper.
I think improper was.
Violative or something.
Substandard.
Okay, good, thank you. I thought maybe there was some.
No, it's not. It's just the.
Okay, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, also no problems with this category.
I do have a comment, and it is that I agree with the classification, and it was a well-done investigation. So kind of no comment.
Yeah. Hard to follow Alan on this round. Thank you. Monique,
I also don't have any comment besides what I made and that I agree with the classification.
in this round, we'll discuss relevant department policies, practices, and training considerations. And Rick will start us out.
I don't know how you could make the policy any more specific. It has to be kind of open-ended because otherwise you're taking the discretion out of it. And it's such a situational such a situational case. By case, look at it, that it could be tough to make it black letter many times. So I think that the policy is fine.
Sorry, can you remind me the title of this section? I want to make sure I don't talk about future stuff.
Relevant department policies, practices, and policy training considerations. I just had it up.
Thank you.
Considerations. But we have training in the future, right?
This is part of training.
Okay, yeah, so great, thank you for clarifying that. I think the thing that always concerns me is when an officer is unclear about something that's so kind of important. And, you know, this is it's so consistent and not with just the Eugene Police Department, but also across police bureaus and departments. Because you're dealing with so much information and trying to grapple with so many situational issues. And as you mentioned previously, also, Deputy Chief, even in, well, just thinking about the litany of information that you're dealing with in a crowd control situation, it's a lot to sort of take in. So I understand the difficulty of knowing the finer details of something like pursuit policies and what should constitute that, or what constitutes an imminent threat specifically. But it is kind of an important policy, important policy that has the impact to have a real damage, and especially in a city center. And it's sort of one of those areas where I feel like every officer who is trained in it, which I think this officer was, should know that off the top of their head, or at least be able to conjure some sort of equivalent to the policy or to the details of the policy. And I'm not sure what training helps with that, but there must be, I would recommend looking into whatever national best practices there are, and I'm sure you do, about training on this particular topic. But anytime, there's the life or death situational issues, use of force and pursuits and, policies related to that, I think it shouldn't come to a case where an officer says they didn't know the details. And I don't know how to plan for that more effectively, but that's the problem I see. That's all.
I think, since Bernadette isn't here, I will point out that Officer A has been employed for 3 years and Officer B for 4 years. That's just something that is usually on the record, so it should be. But I think in terms of policies, I agree that this policy is written well enough for what it should be. I agree with you, Rick. My obvious request would be for more training, or like checking for understanding. This is like the teacher in me, check for understanding of the policies after training, and that could be continuous. And I think in terms of somebody saying that they didn't understand the policy, I understand that, like, if you're zooming in on a policy and like all the little tiny little nitty gritty details, I don't want to armchair quarterback those kind of missing pieces, but this is a big one. Like, I feel like, as Deputy Chief pointed out or said it, if the risk is greater than the reward,
Yeah.
then you shouldn't do it. And this has come up a lot, not just in vehicle pursuits, but also in like chasing, foot pursuits, things, and all of that. Like, I mean, we're gonna be able to find them somewhere, somehow. We don't need to endanger other people. And I feel like that is like Police Academy 101, or it should be. It should be understood, is what I'm trying to say. I don't expect all the officers to know every little detail about every little policy. It would be great if they did. But like in the high stress situation, I don't expect them to be able to recall 100%, but I do expect them to recall this and other important things. Did that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay, let's move.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
thank you.
There's a lot in this policy. I'm looking at the reasonable safety under the definitions section. Factors that the officer consider, and that I guess I should return to this because it's available to me. But what, road conditions, terrain, type of roadway, pedestrian and vehicular traffic patterns. Seventh, it was 7th, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Not the best street in Eugene. It's a big, nasty east road. That's definitely one of the considerations here. Deputy Chief, could you tell us what staleness of crime? I had questions about that part, yeah.
Yeah, think of a recent crime, so that would be the opposite, not stale,
I
obviously.
see.
But let's just say,
somebody had just robbed a bank and then you encounter them versus you now encounter a car several hours after the bank robbery occurred. So you can put two and two together. If I encounter the car right after the bank robbery, presumably the bank robber is in the car. If I encounter the car several hours after the bank robbery, yeah, the bank robber is probably still in the car, but I don't know for sure. So you're gonna maybe take a little bit of a lesser approach in that regard, but staleness of the crime is what that refers to. I mean, it's gonna dissipate your need to apprehend after the fact. It's gonna dissipate as time goes on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know why I was thinking of staleness in terms of evidence, but is that part of this criteria here?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, like everything else, it's situational. Yeah, could there be something that we would really need as far as evidence would go in something we're after? Yeah. But that wouldn't elevate it so far that there would be a need to continue the pursuit. Unless, I don't know, we had kidnapping and maybe the kidnapping
Sure.
has occurred. Thought the individual was in the car. I mean, that's getting real extreme because that's gonna elevate us in a lot of areas too. But yeah, that's what the staleness refers to.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, in terms of practices rather than policies, it's a big chunky policy. And I don't know, I mean, I'm inclined to side with Rick. Not that we're taking sides, of course, but what you said was that there needs to be an amount of subjectivity written into the policy.
There used to be an open-ended part of it, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think again, good case selection, Carolyn and Jose, because we're not gonna be able, I don't think, to pin this down with more language per se, or make it more precise and just expect that officers under these conditions are going to be robotic in that kind of way. But we do have to talk about, I guess, the part where someone said that they lacked familiarity with the policy. Is that a fair way to
Well,
characterize it?
can I weigh in? there
Please.
on that? But it struck me that when I heard that in the interview with him, or at the time of the interview, the recorded interview, the question was asked in connection with another issue. And the witness said something, well, I really don't know about all the technicalities about that, but, the judgment was made about whether or not this officer should pursue. And he did. And that's where the guts of the case ought to be, not whether he or she knew the technicalities, because none of the technicalities that were being asked about had anything to do with this case.
Sure. Is it fair to say, or to paraphrase what you're saying, that they followed the spirit of the policy, if not the particulars of the letter of the policy?
I don't think there's any allegation that he or she didn't follow the letter of the policy.
Other thoughts?
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay, I'm now stuck on that. But what were we talking? Training, policies. So, yeah, I think that the policy isn't any more clear, and a lot of workplaces have policies, and it's not necessarily. I mean, perhaps when you first get there, you read the employee manual, but it's not really up to the employee to know every detail. They just need to know the top line stuff. So, when we're talking about checking for understanding, perhaps we can just have officers, pick out the important policies that affect them on a daily basis and have them summarize it in a sentence or two, or the department can summarize it in a sentence or two for them. Like, what does this actually mean? And how does it affect them on a daily basis? Because that's several pages. They don't have to read that all the time. Certainly don't have to memorize it, but what's the point? Like, what is it telling us to do? And that's what they need to know. So that could be, you could do that in a lot of ways. And then with training, I'm not sure if the department, do you feel like the training is sufficient?
You ask me, I would say it's never sufficient.
Okay.
I would always say that we need to train more in survival skills, your firearms, your defensive tactics, your driving. I don't, and even though
this is an organization that trains pretty much more than anybody I know on the West Coast. I still think we should be doing more, you know, I really do, but.
Yeah, so maybe it is more training and it's a different an innovative way to do that training, because clearly it's not a one officer issue, it's a thing that's happening multiple times, so tweak something and see if that makes a difference.
Thank you.
So definitely it's not what you want to hear when you're doing an investigation like this, that I'm not, fully familiar with the details of the policy. That's just for a lot of reasons, it means then if you didn't violate it, it was kind of lucky because you're not quite sure. But for me, the issue is, this is so fundamental, like as someone who flies airplanes, like thought of getting in an airplane and not having a plan for what happens if the engine quits. It's like if I get into my police car and I put my seatbelt or not, because I guess you're exempt from seatbelts, but if it's your choice to put your seatbelt on, a couple of things could happen every day. You could end up chasing someone, you could end up having to draw your weapon and use it. Just some fundamental, like you say, top level, like 3 things that could absolutely happen every time. So the idea that an officer, 4-year veteran of the police force is in their police car, not clear, or at least would say during an investigation about their conduct of conducting a chase or a pursuit, not say that I acted deliberately, and I do understand the policy. And I think that the training is like, that would be a great example to we've talked about this in the past, to use these real, you don't ever want to use the real world example, because that would put this officer at risk of the other officers knowing that this one did this or whatever. But the point is that right turn into the suspect's vehicle is the moment of truth here that causes all of the damage and the risk to the other people, and that if the officer had simply let the car proceed through the intersection, things would have been different. So they made a deliberate choice. That choice, I wasn't impressed, I wasn't impressed when that officer telegraphed on the radio, pit maneuver was successful. No, as the suspect is driving away, it wasn't successful. And there was a lot of kind of confidence that was misplaced, I thought. I just wasn't, so I think there is a training opportunity, and I think that, when someone, we're gonna get to the adjudication recommendations and whether it was all right or not. Obviously, chain of command thinks that decision to make that right turn into the front of that vehicle or to block it was the correct decision. But for training, it's kind of hard to say if the department doesn't think that anything was, any policies were violated, it's kind of hard to say that there's a correction needed, and it is a subjective thing, and I don't disagree with that point. I just think in this case, I think that given what we know about the suspect and the status of what they were wanted for, I don't believe the appropriate choice was to make that decision. Thank you.
Can I jump in for just a second, Jose? And I think my internet might be bad out here, but I really appreciate good case selection, because the training and policy conversation, I think, is something we're going to come back to. We talk about the annual report, I think, hopefully next month, and that includes a lot of information around pursuits and the increase over the last few years. So I think we'll come back to all of this, and I'm glad that you're kind of dipping your toes in this month. So thank you.
All right, our 4th round of discussion will be adjudication recommendations. I believe Rick started us out last time, and Clay will start us this time.
Yeah, I guess I am curious to hear from the deputy chief about, because you had sort of forecasted that you would be able to talk about the adjudication in the chain of command and your perspective. So I don't know if that happens now or later, but that would be interesting just to hear what your perspective is on this. Because I do think I support this idea that you have to make decisions in a fast moving environment, and there needs to be flexibility for that. But I think I'm aligned with Alan and sort of feeling like Officer A made a strong choice that let a suspect speed away and hopefully safely reduce speed. But then that suspect was re-engaged and, you know, mayhem sort of ensued because of Officer B's actions. And that's sort of how it looked to me. And I was convinced by the auditor's reflection on that, and that Officer B should be found sustained. So yeah, I'm just curious about the perspective from the police department.
Can we invite the deputy chief to the table to share thoughts?
Sure. I'm back.
So, I don't know what it shows in this, but when the pursuit review came to me, I was actually the one that initiated the IA complaint on this. Because when I saw the initial review on it, there's some things for me, my personal ethos, you do not pursue the wrong way on a one-way period. That's just an absolute, you do not do. And so when I saw this and I saw what had occurred, I wanted this investigated a little bit deeper and hear from the officers. And I'm glad I did that because some things came out of it I'll talk about in a minute. But to go to the training point and just to come back and really walk through this. Officer A did everything perfectly that we would expect. He tried to initiate a traffic stop. It did not occur. He shut it down. The only thing I would have preferred is if he pulled to the side of the road and just stopped, so it doesn't look like I'm still following you, but the guy was out of sight. So Officer A, I had no issue with. Officer B, this thing gets off the rails initially because the right turn that he is executing, he's attempting to block this car in and stop any pursuit. Great mindset. However, we failed with training because you cannot block from one end if you do not have the back of the car blocked as well. And so what needed to happen was there needed to be a delay there from Officer B to Officer A to say, hey, I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna block. Can you come in from the backside and we'll execute the block. Had they done that, it would have been perfect. As it turns out, Officer B comes in, he does not have the back cover. And of course, you could have predicted what would happen. The guy hits reverse and off he goes. This is the crux of this for me as to why I said this is within policy. At the moment that the individual backs out and then drives away, he makes contact with an innocent's car, with a civilian's car. That contact was the result of Officer B coming in to try to do the blocking maneuver and essentially hit the violator and pushed into the civilian car.
A hit the car.
No.
A hit
Yeah.
the guy as he backed up.
No.
No,
No, so make sure I have it right. B
Yeah.
comes in, nose in.
He pulled out in front of him on
Mhm.
Correct.
Violator backs and turns to go the
Right,
wrong way on the
turns
one.
back.
Turns to go and
Was
A
there a sign?
smacks him, A T-bones
No,
him.
no, B.
Then the suspect goes across and hits another vehicle, the civilian vehicle.
Yeah,
B,
I'm telling you,
So-
A
B, no,
hits him.
B attempted a fit.
A does.
Yeah.
Back quarter panel.
A hits him before he hits the next car. I'm telling you
I thought
that.
that was B.
so if I may,
Okay.
so as the violator is backing out to try to get out from the body worn and the in-car video, it looks to me like the violator is going to clear the civilian's car and go the wrong way up the one way. At that very moment, Officer A comes in and makes contact with the back of the violator vehicle and essentially pushes that car into the civilian car and causes the collision. Officer B does not see this occur and believes that the guy has intentionally made contact with the civilian vehicle and is now fleeing the wrong way down a one-way. At that moment, he says the guy's driving recklessly or something to that effect, and he's going to kill somebody to that effect. That changed it for me. Because the mindset now is I'm seeing something that's an ongoing threat to the community and I'm gonna initiate a pit maneuver, followed by another pit maneuver, followed by crash up derby. So that is in my mindset, that's what made the change for me to say that this was a pursuit that was not within policy to within policy, albeit I would say very marginally. Does that mean this thing is done? No, by no means. Because we go back and we engage with our training team and say, we need additional training on blocking maneuvers, because obviously this was not executed at all remotely well. We need additional training on post-pit procedures because one of the things that happened with this is as that violator is off to the side of the road and Officer B is nose in with him, Officer A then comes into the side of the violator vehicle with velocity to the point that he shatters the driver's side window and launches the guy a little bit in the car. So that's too great a contact. I mean, there's a lot of things here from a training point of view that we're already on that we're gonna come back and work on. But at the end of the day, when we start to talk about need to apprehend versus risk created, that's why, from my point of view, and the chief concurred where we went to within policy. So,
Just clarification, so it's the subject, what changed it for you is B's subjective belief, albeit a little that he didn't see the A contact causing the contact of the suspect with, so subjectively, B believes that he is being reckless, makes the radio call that you say, and in your mind, that clear, given that they have to act on what they believe and perceive, and that was not reasonable.
What a reasonable officer would
Yeah,
have believed.
yeah.
So it's not what he's
And then
subjective,
again-
what a reasonable officer in his shoes would have believed,
Yeah.
having seen what he saw, correct?
correct. So ultimately, you know, the reasonable belief standard, and we've talked about this here before when I've spoken before the board, and you know, this is codified all the way back in Graham versus Connor, and then ultimately into Oregon revised statutes. You know, the reasonable standard for our officers, and under the circumstances for me, based on what he saw and what he was saying, it's reasonable to continue with the action that he did.
Okay, thank you for that
Yeah.
clarification.
So I think we're still on Clay, so I don't want to interrupt, but I'm curious hearing why the auditor did not agree.
I was gonna let Rob speak to this, sorry. It's also hard to tell when you guys are looking at me versus him. But thank you, DC Adams, that was me. But yeah, this was mostly Rob, so I'm gonna let him take the lead on this.
What was mentioned before, the fact that Officer A chose not to pursue. That Officer A chose not to pursue, so then when Officer B came up. And then the vehicle was stopped. There wasn't communication with Officer A on the blocking maneuver. And if Officer A had been there and it had been communicated like, hey, let's block it, I think it's good. But I personally, and I wasn't there, but I personally thought that the fact that A wasn't there for that blocking maneuver was, you're asking for problems.
Thank you, that's helpful in deciding where.
Okay, let me pose this to you. I spent my life doing this, okay? Let's assume that this violator, they let him go. B pulls away, lets him go, and goes and kills somebody 2 blocks. First thing you do is get a plaintiff's lawyer who's gonna say, if they'd have just stopped him, they'd have kept this person from being killed. And all we could have done, all you did, you're saying now is that you wrecked a couple police cars. And in order to stop him from doing what he did, and that's bad. And you should be liable for the dead person for $1 million.
I agree, I think that is a consideration, and I think the policy kind of tries to make room for that. If the person is convicted of murder or is out on a murder charge, the officers can pursue
What
him.
difference does it make whether they're out on murder or not if the person gets killed down 2 blocks
Well,
away?
but we can only go based off what we know about the suspect, and if we know,
The shoplifter, you're not suggesting that a shoplifter could wreck and kill someone just as easily as, but you wouldn't
So-
suggest.
Yeah, I wanna jump in if I can. I think there are a million different ways we could do hypotheticals on this, and we could go down a lot of different paths, and I have neighbor children screaming, sorry. But I love hearing that, and I love hearing all the thoughts. You guys are really smart people, and I love hearing your opinions. And I think if I could redirect us to the case at hand, because I want to hear your opinions on it, and I don't want to run out of time. Is that okay?
We're still at Clay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It'll be good.
I will just reinforce Alan's point that I was watching the video a little bit to see which officer hit who, and it is true that Officer A comes up to sort of support after the suspect vehicle turns to flee the wrong way on 7th, and then Officer A sort of nicks the car as that's happening, and it goes into the other vehicle. Anyway, just to give you some credit, Alan, for remembering that correctly. I think that was really helpful, DC Adams, to hear your perspective. Yeah, I think from a civilian standpoint, it's hard for me to agree with that. I sort of tend to see that the choice, I just don't, that vehicle stopped at 7th. Doesn't appear as if it's gonna make maneuvers after it stopped at a stoplight in a right-hand lane. It appears as if it's going to continue on their way, not being pursued by Officer A anymore, no sirens around. They're making a legal stop, and so the cascading effect happens because of sort of an act of pursuit, which is this pit stop that the Officer B was trying to do. And for me, I don't know how you deal within policy. It's sort of like in crowd control, when one action begets a worse action from a community member, and then you consider policy violations in that preceding event, but the first action may not have violated policy by the officer. But who started the, sort of cascade of events? And I think in this case, the officer did, or could, you could evaluate that the officer did. Anyway, it's a tough problem, and I think that's why there's disagreement about it. So thanks for explaining that, though. That was helpful.
Yeah, I also just watched the video like 10 times while we're talking, and Alan, you were right. But it also brings up the point of like, Officer B was pulling up, and then the suspect was pulling up, and I don't even know how they were able to like tell for sure that that was the right car. Cause it's like blocked by all the other cars. And I agree with Clay that like that action was what caused the other actions to happen. And if B had not pursued against traffic, I think B had other options. They could have waited until they started moving again and pulled in behind and tried a more appropriate and safe pursuit rather than driving backwards. Just to clarify something that you said that you'd never want to see someone pulling backwards on a one-way street, or
I never want to see a pursuit the wrong way on a
Yeah.
one-way.
so, but then you said that it was within policy that after that error in judgment caused the suspect to go reverse and create the pursuit to
Yeah.
be like within policy. Now, I don't understand how you get from saying, I don't think that it should ever be in policy to go on the other way. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, policy says you shall not pursue down a wrong way on a one-way. I mean, that's in policy. So, just step back just a bit, my personal ethos is no way, you do not pursue down a one-way. Policy reiterates that.
Mhm.
However, policy also talks about need to apprehend versus risk created. And so in this case, this is where the change is. The moment that the violator strikes the civilian car,
Mhm.
now albeit he's pushed into that car by Officer A, but B does not know this at the time, and then flees the wrong way up the one way, and the officer comes on the radio and says, he's driving recklessly, he's going to kill somebody. When those words come out, then that makes the change for me that we have an ongoing imminent threat to the community. Therefore, the officer is justified in initiating and continuing that pursuit. So,
I guess, maybe I do need to split hairs here, like, it should be sustained after the fact that Officer B turned the wrong way on the one-way street. Is that, because you said that that's not within policy, right?
no, Officer B in his actions, he's within policy and actually expectations. That's what we would want to see, is to try. The violator is stopped at the red light. We have opportunity. If to the point is the violator comes away from that red light and we pull behind, you would not be authorized to pursue. If you pursued, then you're clearly outside.
Okay, I see.
So, but what happened was we have poor execution of a proper technique.
Got it.
And that's a training deficiency right there.
Okay, so the fact that Officer B tried to pin facing the wrong way on the one-way street is not what you're saying is?
No,
Okay,
yeah, he's,
Okay.
he's static. He's not driving. It was after the fact.
it was the pursuit after
Yeah.
suspect reverses.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for the
You
clarification.
bet.
I'm glad I split that hair.
I wanna go to a sentence in the auditor's adjudication document. It's in the second to last paragraph, the second to last sentence in the second to last paragraph. You started it, I'm gonna split more hairs.
Do it.
It says, it says, officer,
Yes.
new suspect had a history of eluding law enforcement, and officer's pin attempt of suspect was improper without a second police vehicle and not justified based on the known facts. I'm trying to find this in the policy. Is the part about engaging a pin attempt without the second police vehicle a part of the policy?
I'm deferring to Rob again as I look through the file.
It's not written in that part of 814.
So improper does not mean outside of policy. But at the same time, this really, this, again, good job, case selection. This one's tough. Yeah, it's like you said, Deputy Chief, the cascading events is when the officer comes up and is facing face to face with the suspect, right?
Mhm.
Do you think that communication with Officer A would have prevented that?
Yes,
But it's not without, but it's within policy still.
there's no policy that dictates the mechanics of actually doing a vehicle block. You wouldn't find that within policy. That would be more of a training standard on how we train and teach this maneuver, which is exactly that. This is irrefutable. You cannot block a car unless you have both sides pinned. And we saw exactly what happens. Anybody can drive out of anything unless you're actually engaged. So we're outside of training standards. We're outside of what we've trained for blocking. And now how does that occur? Had Officer B communicated with Officer A, as I had said, hey, like, let's block it. We have an opportunity, and just delayed and waited. And Officer A says, yes, go. And then we come in, which is the way that should have been done. Then yeah, we probably have a successful event. We're not even sitting here talking about this case. Unfortunately, we don't. I think, and I will just speculate a little bit here. Officer B was too aggressive. He should have slowed down, should have delayed a little bit. There should have been a communication that we train and teach. It didn't happen. And then, of course, to use the word, the cascading events happened. And, it's not good. I'm glad we're looking at this. It's not
Do we
good.
know that A was in a position to do anything about blocking?
He wasn't.
The time that he pulled out of his.
He wasn't. He was too far up the street.
That's what I thought, yeah.
And we can see it on the body or the in-car video. A was he was way too far up the street to even be effective.
Right.
A 2-second delay from Officer B, 2.5 seconds, and we'd have had a successful event.
Do you think that should be in policy? In like, say, like there's a tactics section in here, right? Pursuit driving tactics. Should that be a part of policy? You gotta wait until you have another officer there?
Yeah, we could go back and forth on whether that should be in policy or not. I'll give you my opinion. No. Because we can draw it up as well as we want on a dry erase board. We can go out and teach it statically. And when you hit the real world, it's never gonna look the same. And so therefore, if we write policy around, this is exactly what it should look like the nose of your car should be to the rear of the car, the nose. Next thing you know, you end up perpendicular, or you're coming in at the side, or maybe the car's up against a Jersey barrier. There's a billion and one things that'll happen, and the next thing you know, we're going to set ourselves up for failure, our officers, because we're gonna write stuff in a policy that in real world application, we just couldn't do it that perfectly. That's why we leave it as a training standard. We train and teach it in training and move forward from there. So we wouldn't look at this as blocking would not be something we'd normally look at as, well, we could have a vehicle use of force with it, so maybe we would. But not something we'd normally look at as a blocking maneuver, is by nature not considered a use of force.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go around and vote in a second, and so I want to be clear that the difference between the auditor and the deputy chief is that, that you feel that because the officer reasonably believes that the suspect himself hit the pedestrian vehicle and fled, that it's within policy. And the auditor believes that. The auditor believes,
I believe that it was objectively reasonable to assume that the car would elude. I mean, it had eluded in the past, it was stopped, pulled up in front of it. There wasn't a second car there to pin it in. And the driver was known, to have a history of eluding. Yeah, I didn't think that was, the car doing what it did, I think is the reasonable outcome that most people would have. So that was
okay.
why I felt it should be sustained.
Thank you.
And there wasn't communication between B and A either.
And if I could provide just a point of clarification, I'm only sharing with the commission, the board, that this is what I went with. I cannot speak for the chief of police. He concurred with my recommendation in Jane, which I would believe would be along the same lines, but I can't speak for the chief. I can only offer what my thoughts were and why I stated within policy.
Just want to make sure I know what I'm voting.
Yep.
Thank you. So, I really appreciate it, Deputy Chief Adams. I mean, you can't ask for, a more useful thing than to hear from, one of the decision makers about what informed them. What I'm hearing is that, B made a mistake or mistakes. And the chain of command is saying, mistakes are not policy violations, and Rick's gonna say the same. Rick may not agree that he made a mistake or not, but they made a mistake or not, but that mistakes are not policy violations. I wasn't, harping on Officer A hitting the suspect right before the civilian contact because I want to be right about it or anything, but to me, it's very meaningful because it's really giving a pass to B, because the description on the radio, the rationale that you're saying makes it a objectively reasonable standard met is simply wrong. It sure looks from the video as if had A not made that contact, that the suspect would have cleared that civilian car and there never would have been a radio call that he's ramming cars and this is getting, so it's a series of, when do a series of mistakes become policy violations on a policy that's designed to be flexible enough to let officers make. So it is, if that's what everyone means by great case selection, I guess it's great case selection. It seems to me that at some point, the totality of these actions lend me to side with the auditor, but I hear and appreciate what EPD has said. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan.
I'm done.
You done?
Yep.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Adjudication recommendations,
Let's go A and then B.
A and B,
Yeah. But do we
2
agree,
rounds?
do we agree with everybody in A? Because they all agreed.
Yeah,
2 rounds.
we have consensus on A?
You can just raise hands.
Yeah.
Woo.
Do we agree that everybody agreed with A? Yeah.
And it's within policy.
Yes. It's unanimous.
I know I don't get to vote, I just get excited, sorry.
Okay, how about B, we're gonna start with, let me go back to the order, sorry. It's Carolyn.
I do appreciate the thorough talk, and I'm going to agree with the auditor's office that it should be sustained.
I have given begrudging recommendations before on the. I don't wanna say there's sides here. I've given begrudging recommendations. My recommendation is going to be begrudgingly with the auditor this time. And not in a negative way, but, I'm seeing an argument that I can't poke any more holes in, and I tried. So, yeah.
I also agree with the auditor.
I agree with the auditor. Me?
Yep.
I agree with the chief.
And Clay?
I agree with the auditor.
Right.
Again, begrudgingly, sort of like you would say.
You're a weird one, yeah.
I'm not sure it's a policy. Yeah, it's complex. Yes.
I, just real quickly, because I know we're really running long here, but I just want to point, like, vehicle pursuits are always tough. They're always tough. They're tough from beginning to end because they're so fast and just things are happening so quickly. And there's the real human element of, you know, wanting to be objective about, Lord knows what I would do driving that car, right? So just I appreciate all of the discussion and the thoughtfulness around this because yeah, the pursuits are tough from start to finish and then for, you know, months afterward as we talk about them. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we want to go straight to closing comments?
No, I need to be here for the vote and I have to leave.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sorry, we need to do the police commission liaison and just, I want to point out, there's been some, noticing am I allowed to talk about this now? Are we there now?
Yeah.
Okay.
The mission?
Yeah. So we've been working with the CMO, the city manager's office around, there's a little bit of a discrepancy in the code language between how CRB has a nominee to the police commission and then the mayor actually gets to put people on police commission. And so it's just, I let them know that I would clarify with you all that this election is for a nominee to the police commission and then the mayor can ultimately choose to go with it or not. But that's what, when we say election, we are electing a nominee. That's all.
Can I get clarification on the timing of this? Because we are replacing Alan when he's no longer on this board, but Alan's still on this board.
One more meeting.
One more
Yeah,
meeting.
this would not happen until July, and I think city council actually won't be ratifying these until I just got the email, I believe July
It's after our meeting in July, so there will
July
be
22nd. Yeah.
Okay.
So this person would start with police commission after that. But I think once we know who it is, we can figure out whether they get to go to the meeting and all that stuff. But this would be for a July-ish start.
Cool. Then I want to nominate Monique.
I would like to nominate, I would be interested, I maybe would be interested in a different year, as I try to figure out, or as I gain experience on the Human Rights Commission, but Clay has been on the Human Rights Commission, so I'm curious if he's interested in joining the Police Commission.
When are the meetings? I just want to make sure that I would be available.
They're the second Thursday of the month. And so
In the evening?
what?
Okay.
Yeah, in the evening, sorry, 5:30, second Thursday, usually typically at EPD. I will just, this is a little different than the Human Rights Commission post because you are appointed to both commissions. So you are like fully a member sitting at the table on Police Commission and on CRB. Alan can probably speak to this far better than I can. But yeah.
Just remember this. Tuesday often precedes the second Tuesday. Go figure. I did not know that in my life, except now I definitely know that.
The second Thursday often precedes, is that what you said?
The second Tuesday, yes, it does.
I will have a conflict in the fall. I teach a class in the evenings, on Thursdays. But it's not set yet. Anyway, I would be interested. I'm happy if someone else is interested and knows they'll be available also. But it is something that I would happily do. So no hard feelings if it's not needed.
I think you can also, if there are situations like that where you have a conflict, you can send sort of a surrogate. We have done that in the past.
But it
Yeah,
would
that
be,
that would be the only quarter where I would have a standing conflict and
How many, what,
Are you interested?
no,
Really? It's surprising.
they don't like me.
Everybody likes you, come on.
Okay, so can we, should I motion to, a motion to appoint Clay to the police commission?
Second.
as a
Motion
nominee.
to nominate, but yes.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
do I vote?
You can.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks for staying, Carolyn.
Have to go get my children.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Okay, auditor report.
Well, this is gonna be quick because we're late and I sent it to you in email, so I don't have to talk very much. Yeah, we finished our annual report that's included in your packets. We will come back and talk to you all about it next month, but we presented at council last week and yeah, it was well received and good material. So thank you. And thank you, Carolyn and Jose, for coming and talking about the CRB portion of it. I always appreciate that. I had my annual review at council last night. It went well. Thank you all for those of you who were sent surveys and participated in that. I appreciate taking more time, more homework for CRB members. Always, thank you. And we are, yeah, we're continuing to work on a few different sort of issue focused reports, and we'll be putting those out as soon as we finish them. But I think we can stop there. It's late. If anyone has questions, let me know. And thank you for understanding with my virtual attendance this evening.
Thank you.
Any
Okay,
public? Anybody in public?
we're
Yes.
scheduled to do closing comments first, and then we can do public comment.
Sorry.
That's okay. In terms of round robin, I think it's my turn to open this round of discussion. Just would like to thank the deputy chief Adams for letting us put you on the spot. And hear our concerns from various different levels of expertise, so appreciate that and your generosity in responding. Thank you to Robin Lindsay, and also thank you for maintaining an appropriate level of disagreement and decorum in our discussions. Thank you.
So my closing comments, I'm grateful that the deputy chief is here. The case that we reviewed last week was really personal. I tried not to make it personal, but it was personal. And I think one of the biggest things that was meaningful is that you recognize that in fact you told us that things were okay, and now you see perhaps that they aren't. That means a lot. It sounds like, things are in the process of figuring out what substantively can be done to make changes. With respect to that investigation, like we talked about earlier, I think that I'll be looking for if there are investigations like occurred last time where I think there are a couple of us that didn't feel like the narrative was super unbiased. I would like for the auditor, if they agree, if you don't agree, that's something else, but if they agree to say this wasn't so unbiased, and then on the same end, it would be meaningful to hear that if you're going to commend someone, then I would like to hear you reprimand them as well for false logic. If you're going to commend their logic, also check it. And then training. Today, you had said, and I'm not calling out whatsoever happy with where we're going. But today you had said that you never feel like training is sufficient. But when we talked about this a year ago, you had said that basically training was sufficient, that they're trained time and time again. It's iterated and reiterated, so that it's up to them. I hope now that we can recognize that there is some kind of different training that can be done on this topic. And maybe that's something that that the audit can recommend, like what kind of relevant trainings would be meaningful for this group. But like I said, last meeting, what we're doing now is not working, so we have to do something else. And that's.
Thank you.
Like to thank both officers for being here, Deputy Chief, thank you. It really was, useful in this circumstance to hear from you and, your acknowledgement about what you had told us about the case a year ago, is greatly appreciated and, as much as it pains me to hear universally as this topic keeps coming up, that this is how it is in policing and this is a long-term thing. It is a little bit how I'm willing to grudgingly accept that it's an institutional entrenched problem perhaps, but we need to do better. And I appreciate that the department is engaging that issue. And if I didn't say it in my liaison report, the chief, they are interview or talking with an outside consultant, and they didn't need any prompting to take another look at it, and hopefully police commission will monitor it and everything else. Otherwise, thank you, minutes taker Beatrice, the auditor staff, everyone, Lindsay and Rob and the auditor, and all of you for a good spirited discussion. So thank you. One more.
You're gonna be here for the next meeting.
Yes.
Good. All right, I have nothing further.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, similar thanks to what Alan said. Thanks for the nomination to Police Commission. Yeah, in particular, thanks DC Adams for being here. It was helpful to hear your perspective. Also, the training topic was interesting, so appreciate that. I also want to know if the dog is okay.
Yes.
I was concerned about the dog. I assume that the dog was fine.
We have a dog table here that's just fine. But you must be talking about a different dog.
From the case, the dog that was on the top of the car at the end of the chase. Oh, that poor dog. Yeah, I assume that everyone took care of that dog. Anyway, no, I appreciate when we are able to have differences of opinions, but it's really interesting to hear perspectives and to be reminded of the complexity of policing and of how we approach, community safety. So it's a tough issue, and that's why we have all these systems of reviewing how it's done. So I appreciate being a part of it.
Thank you, Clay. It's time for public comment. The Civilian Review Board accepts public comment at each meeting. People wishing to speak in person must sign up to do so using the request to speak form prior to the beginning of the meeting. Those who are participating online may use the raise hand function to indicate their desire to speak. When your name is called, please provide your full name at the beginning of your comment. Each speaker will be given up to 3 minutes to speak and will be warned by the chair when they have 30 seconds remaining of their time. At the end of all public comment, the board may respond to comments made during the public forum. As a reminder, the board cannot accept public comment specific to the case being discussed during the ninth meeting due to bargain protocols. Do we have any?
We have one. I will.
Thank you.
If you guys are ready, I will grant it, and I'm not gonna say your name other than Alicia. Here we go.
Your time starts now.
Great. Good evening, members of the board and Madam Police Auditor. My name is Alicia Leduc Montgomery. I'm a civil rights attorney practicing throughout Oregon. And I'm here today because we had sent you, the board, as well as the auditor, a letter on April 30th regarding a use of force involving several Eugene police officers, including in particular Officer Peckles, who had used force during a traffic stop involving repeatedly punching the person in the face when the person was already tackled to the ground and had 3 officers on top of them, and was saying, I'm, I'm not resisting, I'm not resisting. And the encounter up to that point had been entirely peaceful. And another officer had actually told the person, you're being very compliant. So the use of force, we believe, was unauthorized. Our investigation has shown that this same Officer Peckles has engaged in repeated similar instances, including, again, punching people repeatedly in the face during the course of effectuating an arrest when there are multiple officers involved and the suspect is already basically on the ground and in control of the officers. We have pretty serious concerns about Officer Peckles' use of force and apparent propensity to just be punching people in the face repeatedly when there are other lower uses of force, less harmful means available, particularly when you have multiple officers, folks are deploying tasers, things of that nature. So I just really wanted to ensure that the board had received the letter because it wasn't clear whether the letter based on the address was only going to the independent auditor or if it would also go to the board, and simply just request that the auditor and the board look into this particular incident from our letter, but also investigate Officer Peckles, I think more specifically, due to the apparent repeat conduct of engaging in what we believe is excessive use of force during the courses of arrest when there are other options available. I'm happy to answer some questions, though due to, attorney-client privilege and work product doctrine, I'd rather not discuss anything beyond the scope of what was already contained in our letter. But we appreciate the work you're doing. It's very important. It's very meaningful to folks who have been victims of police violence or what they perceive as excessive use of force. And so we appreciate your work. I'm happy to answer questions.
We good?
Yep, thank you for your comments. Anything else?
I have a question. I haven't, this is Rick Rosette. I'm a member of the board. I have not seen the letter, but I would be interested in the date and location of this event you described.
Do you want to answer that, Leah, or do you want me to?
I'm talking to the person who made the comment, Ms. Montgomery.
So, yeah, I think that would be more appropriate for her to answer. So my understanding from the letter was that both the members of the board and our office were being named in a tort claim notice. So that sort of limits how we're able to respond here. But we can talk about that offline. But Miss LeDuc Montgomery, I want to make sure I'm saying that right. If you would like to respond to that, that's fine.
Yes. I'd actually just clarify, you're not being named as defendants in the tort claim notice. It was a notice to the city of Eugene, but we basically copied your office so that your office or the board could also conduct an investigation. And we stated in the notice that we wanted, part of what we're seeking is for the incident to be independently investigated. So the only defendants would be City of Eugene, and then Lane County Council also received a copy. So I just want to make that clear. But the date of the incident was November 4th, 2023, and it happened in Eugene.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good job.
Thank you.